Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Thanks for joining us for Alaska weather tonight. We appreciate you watching, and we're glad that you found a way to stay up to date with your local weather information around Alaska. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. An easy way to catch this show if you're moving out and about, perhaps you're coming back in late from fishing, simply subscribe to the show on YouTube. If you type in the search bar AKwx TV, short for Alaska Weather TV, you can subscribe to this from our broadcast partners at Alaska Public Media, and we thank them for helping us get this information out to you wherever you're watching from in Alaska tonight. As always, you can find us on the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. That's 24 hours a day and a free call for you in Alaska. Around the web, weather.gov/Alaska is an easy jumping off spot to the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center's breakup maps or your aviation forecast from the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit. And of course, if you'd like to get your local weather forecast, you can simply click on that and click on the map and you'll be one step away from the latest information from our team here. As always, if you can't find what you're looking for, let me know. I'm happy to serve you any way I can, and that email is david.snider@noaa.gov. We were talking about yesterday flooding along the AKwx River there and up around AKwx as the water is draining out of the Brooks Range. We are dealing with water that's coming down the range, and you know, a lot of this is due to snowmelt. So a lot of warm weather moving through the region, really melting back the snow pretty sharply and pretty quickly. And as that continues today and tomorrow, we expect to see further rises there in AKwx, probably cresting around Saturday morning. So we are seeing some reports of flooding around the old airport road, and we do expect to see some buildings take on some water there in those low-lying spots in the region, so don't be surprised to see that. The next trick is, where does the water go? And for places like Hughes and Huslia, we do expect to see the water coming up in your area as well. Now, there are no flood warnings for those regions or villages just yet, but we do expect that as that water travels downstream and we continue to have snowmelt that's at a pretty high rate, we're going to start to see some possibilities for at least some bank erosion and probably some higher water in your villages. So be mindful of that. Keep an eye on the river and let us know if you see something that doesn't look quite right or looks like the water is coming up into places where it shouldn't be. Let us know and make that report so that we can keep more people safe, especially where you are and certainly downstream. So thanks for doing that. A flood warning in AKwx at least through Saturday morning and likely a little bit longer. As we look at the breakup map for today, you can see everything south of the Brooks Range is wide open now. And now we're focusing our attention for breakup on the north slope. The Sag and the Kuparuk, of course, would be the next in line there. And you can see that there are already some changes there along the Kuparuk. The Sag River is taking its sweet time, but you can see some open there and certainly some changes. So if you have information there, we'd certainly welcome that to the river forecast centers at the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. Fire danger is growing with drier, warmer days, of course. No surprise there. Higher fire danger across the upper Yukon and the Yukon Flats and around the Tanana Valley into the Copper River Valley and now across the western Kenai Peninsula. And looking back through some of my stats and just memories of being here now for more than a few years, we look back and we think of the Funny River Fire. I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago this time of the year. And so things start up pretty quickly, and all of a sudden down in the Kenai, a good reminder to be careful with fire no matter what you're doing, and especially as you're doing it out over the 3-day holiday weekend. Now across the upper Tanana, or the lower Tanana I should say, and then certainly into the middle Yukon Valley, you can see fire dangers growing there, and certainly into the Denali High Country, and then also across the Kobuk and Noatak lower terrain in parts of Southwest. Fire danger has been growing there too. Here's a look at the satellite picture. Low pressure is spinning up. This is going to provide at least some gales across the north and western part of the Gulf. Spinning clouds into southeast. Your nice weather is going to take a break for about 24 hours. You're going to get a little more wind, but really more rain and gloom than anything else. This doesn't look like a huge wind maker for you. As we watch this weather progress, the dry, clear skies that you had yesterday, that's fading away. But this should be out of here and gone fairly quickly. So by the time you get into, probably late Thursday and Friday, you'll forget all about it until you see the next wave on the chart. But it does look like you'll have a couple nice days coming your way, so enjoy that while you can. Out across the west, you can see several areas of low pressure, most of those really minor there between St. Paul and Adak. We've got another one just across the Yukon Delta, and another weak little push of cool air that's going to have some impacts, again, on that snowmelt we're talking about around AKwx, and certainly the cooler nights that you've been experiencing there. It looks like things will be fairly mild for the next couple days. As far as precipitation goes, low pressure sitting across the western Gulf right now, and that's really the main game in town. 981 millibars. We're looking at rain that's really just kind of encroaching around Lake Iliamna this afternoon, all the way down toward Cape Newenham, and then out toward the eastern chain. Most of that is really concentrated around this low, and you can see that on the radar picture. If you go to radar.weather.gov and then click on Alaska, you'll be able to see where it's falling there. Around South Central, you can see the high pressure ridge poking into Prince William Sound, and it's really holding back the rainfall there. This is going to probably work its way into South Central eventually. Thursday looks to be a better day for that, for areas down to the south, and then by Saturday probably working its way through the Anchorage region and Matanuska and Susitna valleys. Everything else will just be kind of more sloppy and drippy than anything else. High pressure out across the west. You can see the effects of that with fog out across the Bering all the way through the Bering Strait, and some pockets of light rainfall across the northwest coast. For tonight, anything we see around Cook Inlet probably going to be drying up, as the precipitation chart makes it look like wall-to-wall rain, but with wind coming up over the Kenai Mountains, chances are things are going to dry out pretty significantly. Better chance for rainfall in southeast. Higher terrains looking at a little bit of snow, so not to be fooled. Unless you're going to the top of the peaks, you'll probably not see a whole lot of that. Conditions are pretty warm, and showers, maybe a residual thunderstorm across the Alcan border sneaking its way over out across the central chain. A few showers there, otherwise more clouds on the Bering than anything else. High pressure's in charge out there, 1,027 millibars for Thursday. You can see that's going to push just a little bit of cooler air in across our west coast villages there. Showers and maybe some light rainfall lingering around the Kotzebue Sound into Norton Sound. Unalakleet, probably looking at clouds and some rainfall. Nothing too low, but there will be some pretty broad areas of IFR that'll sit around the west coast. We'll check on those aviation charts here in just a minute. Showers and thunderstorms will be a little more likely in the coming days across the interior, and primarily in the vicinity of this trough of low pressure for the interior, simply because it's going to be warming up. And that thermal trough, as we like to call it, is a sure sign of summer. So we are going head on into the summertime patterns here very quickly around the interior of Alaska. Showers continue across the Gulf Coast. You can already see some improvements for southeast. Thunderstorms will primarily be on the other side of the mountain, so no major concern for you there. High pressure sitting across the Gulf tomorrow. 1,033 millibars. The next wave creeps your way towards southeast, and as promised, we deliver. You see clear skies. Beautiful Friday shaping up in southeast. A nice day to be in the capital city, even Prince William Sound, and probably right here along the Kenai Peninsula. Enjoy that if you can. Low pressure sitting south of the eastern chain, 1,002 millibars, pushes the next front into parts of the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, and southwest with showers there. Still dry here, but we'll likely see a better risk of rainfall moving into parts of south central and the Cook Inlet region as we go through the weekend. So again, Friday's a good day to be outside. Showers up north in the Brooks Range and warmer weather moving in. That means a better chance for more of that snowmelt coming down the Koyukuk. Here's a quick check of temperatures. 40s and 50s for southeast tonight, and for south central, just a hair cooler than that. Mid-40s for southwest, 36 in Macoriac, and temps near 50 for the Yukon and Tanana valleys, including Fairbanks, just shy of freezing up north, and high temps tomorrow in the 60s and 70s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to your aviation forecast now. IFR conditions are expected to be widespread across the North Slope. You will see a few MVFR holes between Wainwright and Utqiagvik probably in the morning, and you'll notice that shield of cloud cover and poor visibility extends just about down to the Yukon Valley, but really most of the valley itself should be VFR to start. Out across the west, widespread IFR through the chain into St. Paul, St. George, Nunivak Island, Atoll and Streighton, right up to the Yukon Delta, looking at IFR to start. Patchy MVFR across the Bristol Bay region and into Cook Inlet, IFR around Kodiak, and across the outer coast of southeast all the way up toward Yakutat and into Prince William Sound. As we go through the afternoon, that probably won't change a whole lot there in the eastern Gulf Coast. This is all wrapping around that low pressure system we've been talking about. Across southeast, marginal conditions should be fairly widespread. You'll notice the IFR pulls back off the western coast just a little bit. Marginal conditions, though, will continue around the Yukon Delta and into southwest, and you'll see improvements around Kodiak Island. We're going to watch for shower and thunderstorm activity across the upper Yukon into the areas generally north of Fairbanks there. Watch for IFR conditions to remain intact across most of the North Slope, especially around your coastal villages. Kotzebue Sound area, looking at MVFR with IFR just touching Shishmaref and probably up to Cape Espenberg at times. IFR conditions there around Etolan Strait, not across the west. By Friday morning, we're back to the same old thing. VFR across the Yukon Valley into the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, and just to the north there into the Chukchi Coast and the Beaufort Seacoast, IFR should be maintained. Look at southeast though. You get a nice patch of clearing there. VFR to start your Friday. We'll see some holes around Cook Inlet and up toward the Susitna and Matanuska valleys, but just south of that, smacked in with IFR from Kodiak all the way down the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula through Sandpoint, and also around St. Paul and St. George. As we get into the afternoon, you can see that advances back toward the west coast again, with MVFR pushing into the coastal regions and up into the Kuskokwim Valley, along the western Alaska Range around the Kenai Peninsula. Southeast still looking pretty good for Friday, and IFR should be fairly widespread across the Gulf and the North Slope. Let's take a look at your pass conditions then in detail for your Thursday. IFR to start for Anaktuvik into Adigan Pass. You'll see some probably marginal conditions developing there throughout the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see VFR improving throughout the daytime, so some good news there. Rainy Pass also looking to see visual flight rule by afternoon hours. Windy Pass, look for that to improve from a marginal start in the morning. Isabel Pass looking pretty good. VFR and Mentasta Pass looking to move over toward visual flight rule as the day goes on. As we get into Thursday, watch for Tanita Pass to see some improvements after a MVFR start. Portage Pass leans over toward IFR as the day goes on, with the weather moving in from east to west. And for Thursday, Chilkoot and White Pass probably also leaning over toward marginal conditions. Friday looks a lot better. Freezing levels, yesterday we talked about the spaghetti mess we saw on this chart, but it is a sign of a lot of warm air intruding in from the east. So you can see 6, 8, 10,000 foot levels here across southeast and the eastern Gulf, and then a very short ridge trough pattern in the upper atmosphere. You'll see that in a minute, but all this cold air descending here. I should almost have colored this a really deep blue so you could see that 2,000 foot level in the mess of everything on the chart here. But anywhere 2,000 to 4,000 foot levels across south central and southwest, and levels warming up with that warm air sneaking in, wrapping around into the Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sound region, as warm as 6,000 to 8,000 feet. Here's the icing potential, and you see it's pretty high up there because of that warm air. There is icing, but you're going to have to go pretty high up there, 8, 9, 10,000 feet and above for isolated moderate. Most areas are going to be too warm to have any significant threat. So good news there. You could certainly find an isolated patch or two below it probably across northern areas, but in general, this is the big stuff. Here's the jet stream pattern. And remember I said we had a big ridge trough pattern. Here's the ridge out in the west, and then a really short trough here across the North Pacific, back into a ridge across the north and eastern Gulf, and then back into a trough for the lower 48 with high pressure up north. So this is forcing all that warm air westward into the Arctic regions and the Bering Strait. At 9,000 feet, it looks like this. We've got southerlies across the Alaska Peninsula, generally 15 to 20 knot winds across the interior. Some of that's coming in from the south, and you're getting into a little bit more of a westerly flow north of the Bering Strait. A westerly onshore flow into southeast, 40 to 50 knots there. At 3,000 feet, here's a little bit of a ridge with 20 to 35 knot winds coming in from the west. Generally light winds at 3,000 across the interior, 10 to 15 knots or so. Most of those seem to be westerly, a little bit of a southeasterly flow across the eastern Brooks Range, and then high pressure here across the western Bering, a northeasterly flow working into the central and western chain. So what do we have for turbulence on Thursday? Not as bad as today. We've got isolated severe mapped out for today. Tomorrow should be better. South central, southwest, and Kodiak Island. Watch for considerable moderate to be fairly widespread below 4,000 feet.
Leatherbacks are the largest turtles on Earth, growing up to 7 feet long and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. These sea turtles are among the most highly migratory animals on Earth, some traveling up to 10,000 miles a year between their nesting and feeding grounds. Prevalent in every ocean except the Arctic and Antarctic, the species overall is declining, more so in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, the Mexican population was once thought to be the largest in the world and has experienced an alarming decline.
This trajectory of decline that we've seen, and actually collapse. We're talking about only 20 or 30 turtles nesting every year, where thousands used to just 40 years ago. That's the kind of dramatic decline.
The western Pacific population has been declining steadily, and it's particularly critical to act now before it collapses, while there are enough turtles in nests to respond to conservation measures. but threats to all leatherbacks in the Pacific need to be addressed.
The top threats to populations are uncontrolled coastal development, all the bad stuff on the nesting beaches, egg harvest, poaching of the females, predation on the eggs by dogs and pigs. Deforestation makes the sand too warm and dry and the eggs don't hatch. Another one is incidental capture in fishing gear. During their vast migrations, they get caught in fishing gear throughout the Pacific. And finally, marine debris, which the leatherbacks mistake for their favorite food, jellyfish, and they choke on those.
Protecting leatherbacks in U.S. waters alone is not enough to ensure the continued existence of the species. The highly migratory nature of Pacific leatherbacks requires cooperation and international collaboration. NOAA is focusing on partnerships with Mexico, Central America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific.
Our action plan promotes a holistic recovery strategy that addresses all the sources of mortality. So that's basically ensuring that the remaining nesting sites are protected and the nests produce as many hatchlings as possible. And then secondly, in tandem with that, is reducing the fisheries-related mortalities. We're working with international partners to incentivize community participation on the nesting beach conservation and developing alternative livelihood programs that wean communities off leatherback resources and introduce alternative methods for food and income. Recovery is going to take a long time, on the order of 20 to 30 years at least, before we see some of these actions bear fruit. But here in the US, we can all help leatherbacks by making seafood choices, for instance, that support sustainable fishing practices. And beachgoers can certainly do their part by keeping our oceans clean of plastic debris, picking up marine litter, particularly plastic bags.
Together with our partners, we are strengthening protection and conservation efforts to ensure a future for leatherbacks, helping them to survive and once again thrive in the waters of the Pacific Ocean.
For over 40 years, NOAA scientists have been collecting data and piecing together the story of the gray whale. Each year, new discoveries are made, revealing the secrets of this ancient traveler. With the northeastern Pacific population recovered, leading scientists from the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center continue their research efforts to help save the western population from extinction. The most effective way to identify individuals and count the population is to photograph them from the surface. Using the gray whale's distinctive markings and gray spots caused by parasites on their skin, scientists document these characteristics to identify individuals.
So we're able to track migratory pathways and corridors by the simple use of photo identification. There are other ways to do that as well, biopsy sampling and genetics.
And from the air.
Aerial photography is one way you can study animals based on their size and shape. So you can learn a lot about nutritive and reproductive condition of whales just by measuring their size and shape from vertical aerial photographs.
You can also put satellite transmitters on them and track them remotely. You put the transmitter on and let them go, and you watch them move across the Pacific or down to China or wherever it might be.
To further learn and discover where these great sojourners swim, the team of researchers traveled to Russia and set up camp on Sakhalin Island.
The main focus of our research while we were on Sakhalin was to collect photo identification. If it was a whale that we had not collected a genetic sample from previously, we would also attempt to collect a sample from the whales.
Whereas whales are endowed with natural insulation, their human observers must gear up to brave the cold in order to study these marine giants up close.
We're typically only able to work about 1/3 of the time that we're there, and that's mostly due to this fog that just invades the area and sits sometimes for weeks on end. So it can be very challenging to try and do field work in this site.
Recently, 2 whales from the western population surprised scientists by migrating across the Pacific to the waters of California and Mexico.
It's a really fun finding. It's added another piece to the puzzle that we didn't previously know about. And I would have to say that it's opened up more questions than we had before.
Research scientists from Japan, Russia, and the United States share images of animals they've spotted.
We take a photograph of an individual off of Sakhalin Island, and we get a phone call from Japanese scientists, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got a picture of a gray whale in Japan. We say, can you send it to us? We'd love to try and match it. They'll send us the picture, we'll compare it to our catalog, and we'll say, hey, we've got a match from Sakhalin to Japan.
Unlike many species of whales that still remain on the endangered species list, the eastern Pacific gray whale, once on the brink of extinction, now numbers about 20,000 individuals. Recovery efforts that started 40 years ago and the ongoing research and monitoring by NOAA scientists have contributed to the conservation of the gray whales. Together, with legal protection and public education, scientists are playing their part to ensure the survival of this magnificent migratory animal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your sea ice edge, we continue to see a broad area of marginal ice up across the Chukchi Coast, mainly from just south of Point Lay all the way up through Wainwright and Utqiagvik. You can see that bluer shade there indicating that marginal ice. The thicker 80% concentration regions are still from Utqiagvik eastward toward about Prudhoe Bay, but you can also see very small indications of change there across the Beaufort Seacoast because of the melting freshwater coming out of the Sag, the Kuparuk, and other streams there across the coast. So we're going to watch for continued changes there, but probably in just a matter of days, what you see across the Bering, most of the Bering, at least as far as Alaska concerns go, will be generally ice-free. So we're moving quickly into summertime patterns. For southeast, look for a light north wind in the Stevens Passage region. Just some small seas there from Petersburg down to Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Along the outer coast is really where the activity is going to be. A stronger onshore push with westerlies, 15 knots. 10 to 11 foot seas, and probably looking about 9 to 10 foot seas here south of Sitka all the way into the Clarence Strait and Dixon Entrance region. You'll notice higher seas and stronger winds out over the Gulf for Thursday. For Friday, a lot of that kind of dampens out a little bit, but we'll still be left with some residual higher winds and seas right across the outer coast, outside of Cross Sound, all the way down to the Dixon Entrance, talking about 25 to 30 knot winds and about 10 foot seas for most areas. Light winds and generally small seas for most of the inside passage. Southerlies working through the Lynn Canal, coming up to about 15 knots and 3 foot seas on Friday. Outside of Prince William Sound, winds will be a little bit stronger on Thursday. Southeasterlies at 25, 13 foot seas there, 14 to 16 footers as you get out toward the Barren Islands. An east and northeasterly wind coming down Cook Inlet. Probably about 25 to 30 and about 7 to 11 foot seas, but 4 foot seas, it's a little bit choppy inside of Prince William Sound. That greatly improves for Friday. In fact, a lot of the weather across the eastern Gulf is going to be great. Things quiet down here, but we're still going to have some unsettled weather here, so watch for some showers and at least a little bit of wind in the region. 10 to 15 knots for most areas. The western Barrens looking at 20 knots and about 5 foot seas there on Friday. Small seas in Cook Inlet. Out of the south, 10 knots and 3 foot seas there. Just outside of Kenai. For Thursday in Bristol Bay, northeasterlies 15 knots, 3 foot seas, westerlies down the coast there. And as you look at the Pacific waters, you're looking at about 25 to 35 knots. The higher winds and seas just east of Kodiak to AKwx. About 19 foot seas are expected as you push into that stronger area of low pressure just hovering right around Kodiak Island. You'll notice the winds switch around for Friday. A broader east and southeasterly flow will be the predominant pattern there as we go into the beginning of the weekend. Easterlies for Shelikof Strait with 5 foot seas on a 20 knot wind, 30 knot winds down around Sand Point with 12 foot seas as we get into your Friday Friday afternoon. For the Aleutians, a north and easterly flow for the entire region. The strongest winds will be across the central and eastern chain, 15 to 25 knots, and about 7 to 8 foot seas expected for most regions. 5 foot seas north of Adak, Atka, and Nikolsky there on that 15 to 20 knot wind for Thursday. As we get into Friday, stronger winds are going to build in here as that pressure gradient tightens up. High pressure is still in charge of a lot of the region, but it's kind of losing a little bit of ground here, so the winds are going to pick up to manage that. 25 to 35 knots around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, 12 to 13 foot seas on the south side, and about 8 to 10 foot seas there around the central and eastern chain. Notice southerlies are returning here across Kiska and Chemia as that high pressure ridge moves just a little bit to the east. Thursday across the west coast, 15 to 20 knot winds in most areas there from Unalakleet and Norton Sound, 15 knots, 3 foot seas. Northwesterlies around Macoriac and Nunivak Island with a 4 foot sea there. And northerlies for St. Paul and St. George, a 15 knot wind and a 5 foot seas expected. As we get into Friday, look for light north and easterly winds through Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, and around Nunivak Island. Northeasterlies coming out of the Kuskokwim Delta, 3 to 5 foot seas they're building in for St. Paul and St. George on that northeast flow. And St. Matthews looking at light winds and generally small seas with 3 foot seas forecast for your Friday. Light winds across the Beaufort Seacoast and over the ice. Notice we do have 2 foot seas there now for the eastern coast around Kaktovik, 10 knot winds out of the east for you. North and westerlies wrapping into the Kotzebue Sound region with 2 to 3 foot seas on a 10 to 15 knot wind. As for Friday, light winds and small seas, 1 foot seas around Kaktovik with a light 5 knot wind, and light onshore winds blowing into Kotzebue Sound around 10 knots or so with 2 foot seas for Friday in the Chukchi coast. Recapping tonight's weather, a broad area of low pressure that's pretty tightly wound is working its way into Kodiak, Shelikof Strait, and the Bristol Bay region with rain. Probably won't see a whole lot of rain here around the Cook Inlet region, including Anchorage and the Mat-Su. Just because of downsloping winds off the Kenai, but we will see rain moving into southeast. We also have a flood warning for Allakaket that'll go into Saturday now. It does look like we're going to see some higher water and some at least minor flooding around Allakaket, but do report that if you have additional high water concerns. A lot of that will be flowing downriver toward Hughes and Hoosley as we go, so watch for the potential for bank erosion there and perhaps some flooding as we go. Showers and thunderstorms in the interior tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.